Hi everyone, welcome to the Elendi Files, where we navigate the complexities of the global regulatory landscape of medical products. Our goal is to help make global medical product regulations accessible to everyone. So whether you're a manufacturer, intermediary, regulatory specialist, or a CEO of a medtech startup, you're in the right place. Be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn and our website, ElendiLabs.com. This is Teddy, the General Manager of ElendiLabs. At ElendiLabs, we're all about connecting clients, be it medical product manufacturers, medtech startups, biotech startups, with the right regulatory expertise to get products to people faster. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Karol, who helps to navigate the complexities of the Costa Rica market. We're going to be spending some time learning more about the regulation landscape in Costa Rica and the Costa Rica Health Authority. And Karol, thanks for being here to kick things off. Could you give us a brief introduction of what you specialize in, like your competencies?
Yeah. Thank you, Teddy, and thank you for having me. Well, I am a microbiologist specialized in quality and regulatory affairs. I have worked in highly regulated environments like clinical laboratories. And most recently, I work as evaluator at the Ministry of Health in Costa Rica, where I evaluate submissions for medical devices, especially IVDs. I review dossiers for product registration, renewals, and post-approval changes, and also perform risk-based classification. So after that experience, I decided to work as a consultant in quality and also in regulatory affairs. So I guide teams here in Costa Rica to achieve an efficient and compliant market access.
Great. And that's a bit of self-intro. And let's dive a bit deeper into the technical side. I'd like to start with what are the costs and timelines for registering each class of medical devices in Costa Rica? There are like 4 classes, right?
Yes, we have 4 classes. Well, the official timelines established by regulation are generally for 4 months for medical devices and IVDs and 2 months for dental devices. However, I always tell manufacturers that regulatory timelines and real-world timelines are not always the same. For example, during 2024 and 2025, some medical device registrations were taking close to 1 year because of a significant backlog at the Ministry of Health. But the good news is that the government has made a strong effort to reduce that backlog, and processing times have improved considerably. Today, although the official timeline is not always met, but most well-prepared applications can typically be completed within 6 months, more or less. And regarding cost, and for all the classes, it's the same. Regarding cost, the official registration fees are very low in Costa Rica. Class 1 device are generally exempt. Class 2 device pay only $25. And Class 3 and Class 4, $50.
USD.
So in reality, yeah. Okay. In reality, the biggest costs are usually document legalization, translations, and regulatory support rather than the government fee itself.
Well, that's very good overview of the registration in Costa Rica. And I also know that Costa Rica is famous for manufacturing a lot of the world's medical devices. But if a foreign manufacturer wants to turn around and sell their products into Costa Rica, they encounter a totally different regulatory landscape. How does the market entry process differ from the export process?
Well, I think there is a common misconception that entering the Costa Rican market is significantly more complicated than manufacturing for export. But in practice, the regulatory requirements are not dramatically different from other countries. From a regulatory perspective, the market entry process is very similar with other regulatory frameworks. Manufacturers must classify the device, prepare the registration dossier, obtain the required legal documentation, and submit the application through the Ministry of Health. And the documentation request is generally consistent with other regulatory frameworks, including product information, labeling, technical documentation, and the free sale certificate from the country of origin. So in my experience, the main challenge is not the complexity of the requirements themselves, but rather the response times and administrative timelines associated with the review process. And for domestic manufacturers, there are some practical advantages. There is no need, for example, to submit a free sale certificate. And additionally, the requirement to submit evidence of good manufacturing practice for local manufacturers is currently suspended while the Ministry of Health finalized the specific GMP regulatory framework. So once that framework is fully implemented, I expect a stronger regulatory oversight of manufacturers operating within Costa Rica. So rather than describing the process as a completely differently, I will say that Costa Rica has a fairly accessible regulatory pathway. Success usually depends on understanding the local requirements, preparing a complete dossier, and planning appropriately for regulatory timelines.
Yeah, it seems that the Costa Rica regulations are quite dynamic because they are updating the regulations from time to time. And also, I think
Yes.
Costa Rica authorities, they don't just say medical device, they use the term EMB, right, under decree number
Yes.
43902S. For a layman, what exactly fits into this definition? And are we talking about everything from digital thermometers to pacemakers? They're all medical devices.
Yes, it's almost the same, EMB and medical devices. Costa Rican definition is broad enough to cover everything that you say, from a simple digital thermometer to a pacemaker. So although Costa Rica use the term EMB, the concept is very similar to what most regulatory frameworks refers to a medical device. The terminology is different, but the underlying regulatory principles are largely aligned with international frameworks. So EMB is any instrument, equipment, software, material, or related product intended by the manufacturer to be used in humans, only in humans, for purposes such as diagnosing, preventing, treating, or alleviating disease or injury, modifying anatomy or physiological processes, or supporting reproductive health. One distinction between medical device and from a medical device in Costa Rica and other regulatory frameworks is that Costa Rican regulation also includes some products like aesthetic treatment equipment, for example, non-corrective contact lens, and certain instruments used for permanent makeup, semi-permanent makeup, tattooing, and invasive skin piercing procedures are a medical device in Costa Rica. Well, an EMB in Costa Rica. So the easier way to think about EMB is that it is essentially Costa Rican regulatory term for medical device, but it's almost the same.
Okay, but I'm also wondering if there's any combination, drug device combination products in Costa Rica. How do we differentiate between drugs and medical devices?
Yes. One key distinction between a medical device and medicine is the mechanisms of action. EMB does not achieve its primary intent purpose through pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic means, although those mechanisms may play a supporting role. But in C, the mechanisms of action is not pharmacological to be a EMB.
But what if the medical devices contain pharmaceutical products like antibiotics and yeah?
Yes, in that case, you have to proceed with both registration.
So of both pharmaceutical products, so medicine and medical device. Okay, good.
Yes.
And I'm also wondering about the languages. Should the documents be prepared in English or in local languages?
In Spanish, everything has to be in Spanish.
Spanish.
Yes.
And what about labeling requirements? Also
in Spanish. The labeling, you have to provide the original labeling and also the translated to Spanish. But all the if the labeling is very clear, you can use the original label. Only you have to traduce the name of warnings or something like that if there are in other language.
So still they have to be translated to Spanish.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you have to translate it.
Okay. And I also hear that Costa Rica's 4-tier risk classification, class 1 to class 4, borrows heavily from Health Canada's rules. And why does Costa Rica align with Canada, and how does a manufacturer figure out which tier their device falls into?
Yes, Costa Rican classification system is based on Health Canada's framework, and both use a 4 risk-based model from class 1 to class 4. However, it's important to understand that Costa Rica has its own classification rules and regulatory requirements, so manufacturers should not automatically assume that a device will receive exactly the same classification in both countries. There are some differences. As to why Costa Rica aligned with the Canadian approach, the Ministry of Health has never provided a detailed official explanation. However, the Canadian model offers a well-established and internationally recognized risk-based framework that could be adapted to the Costa Rican regulatory environment while maintaining consistency with global regulatory practice. And for conventional medical devices, classification is primarily based on risk. So regulators consider factors such as the intent use of the device, whether the device is invasive or not invasive, the duration of patient contact, whether it is implantable, whether it is an active device, and also, for example, in vitro diagnostics device follow a slightly different logic because the risk is often associated not with direct patient contact, but with the impact that an incorrect result could have on patient care or public health. So for manufacturers, the most important step is not trying to match a Canadian, European, or FDA classification, but carefully applying the classification rules established by Costa Rican regulations.
Okay. But at the same time, but there is a lot of buzz around class 1 low risk devices. Is it true that under recent decrees, all class 1 devices are actually exempt from full registration, as you just mentioned? Or is there any catch?
Yes, it is true. Under Costa Rican current regulatory framework, Class 1 medical devices are exempt from obtaining a full sanitary registration before being marketed. However, there is an important distinction because that exception from registration does not mean exception from regulation. So class 1 medical devices can be commercialized without going through the traditional registration process, and that facilitates market access for low-risk products. But it's important to say that manufacturers and distributors must still comply with several important regulatory obligations. For example, import requirements, labeling regulations, advertising controls, post-market surveillance, and oversight by the Ministry of Health. So the catch is, if we want to call it that, is that the exemption only removes the registration requirement itself, but companies are still responsible for ensuring that the product complies with all applicable regulatory requirements and can be inspected or reviewed by authorities if necessary.
Let's talk about shortcuts. If a manufacturer already has a US FDA clearance or approval for their class 2 or 3 or 4 devices, I hear that I'm also wondering if Costa Rica, like other countries, might reward the manufacturers with a simplified process, and how much time and paperwork does an FDA approval actually save you here?
Yes, well, many people assume that FDA pathway is mainly about faster approvals, but in my experience in Costa Rica, the biggest advantage is actually the reduction in documentation. There may be some prioritization in the review process, but the ministry still performs its own evaluation, so the timeline is not necessarily reduced dramatically. The real value is that manufacturers can avoid submitting certain technical elements, including the most important is the clinical evidence and also information about applicable international standards. These for class 3 and class 4 device can represent a significant reduction in workload. And of course, companies need to meet the eligibility requirements that are a valid FDA issue free cell certificate. That's essential. And also the manufacturer or the registration holder associated with the FDA authorization must be located in the United States. So yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So there's still value for FDA cleared medical devices. Okay.
Especially for class 3 and class 4.
But still, they have to be translated to Spanish.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
and even with the simplified route, you still need a certificate of free sale from your country of origin. And what is the number one administrative mistake foreign companies might make when getting these documents apostilled or legalized for Costa Rica authorities?
Yes, the free sale certificate is one of those documents that looks simple but generates a surprising number of problems. One common mistake is obtaining the certificate from an entity that is not the recognized health authority in the country of origin. For example, in China, Costa Rica only accepts certificates of free sale issued by the NMPA and not by chambers of commerce or other organizations. Another frequent issue is the legalization process. For example, some companies legalize a copy of the document rather than the actual signature of the issuing official. So that might be acceptable from some countries, but for certificates issued by FDA or NMPA in China, Costa Rica generally expects the legalization of the original signature. So the legalization of a copy is not accepted. I also frequently see certificates issued to distributors or authorized representatives in third countries. It's very frequently. And in Costa Rican regulations require the certificate to be linked to the country of origin of the product. So you have the opportunity to present the free sale certificate from the manufacturer's country, the legal manufacturer's country, or a subsidiary of the legal manufacturer. So before submitting any registration, I always recommend validating the free sale certificate carefully because correcting these issues can take weeks or months in the process.
Okay, wow, that's so many tricks in the details. And
Yeah.
and I also know that now there's an online portal called Registrelo, which requires a local digital signature. Can a foreign manufacturer log into the system themselves, and are they completely dependent on a local partner? And has this whole registration process gone digital? So, or everything will be consolidated and processed on the online portal?
Well, in practice, foreign manufacturers are not completely dependent on a distributor, but they do need a legal representative established in Costa Rica. The requirements goes beyond simply accessing the Registrelo platform or obtaining a local digital signature. It's because in Costa Rican regulations require that there be a legal representative within the country who is authorized to act on behalf of the manufacturer for regulatory matters. So to establish that relationship, the manufacturer must run a power of attorney that provides the local representative with the authority to submit applications, respond to regulatory requests, manage registration, and interact with the Ministry of Health when necessary. Also, this representative also assumes certain legal responsibilities in relation to regulatory compliance and communication with authorities. So many manufacturers choose to use their local distributor as the registration holder and their legal representative because it can be a convenient solution when entering the market. However, that's not the only option. Today, there are specialized regulatory consulting firms in Costa Rica that provide independent legal representation services exclusively for regulatory purposes. This allows manufacturers to maintain the control over their registration while still complying with local requirements.
Yeah, you just mentioned that we must appoint a local registration holder. And if the manufacturer signs up with a local distributor to hold their registration, who actually owns it should be 5 year, right? The certificate. And who owns the 5 year certificate? And what happens if the manufacturer wants to break up with the distributor later?
Yes, the certificate, who owns the certificate is the legal manufacturer. And additionally, that's what, under Costa Rica regulation, the owner is the legal representative. But additionally, many manufacturers explicitly protect that relationship through the power of attorney granted to their local representative. So if the manufacturer decides to change distributors or terminate the relationship with the local representative, Costa Rican regulations provide mechanisms to transfer the registration. This is handled through a post-approval change within the Registrelo platform. In the same way, the manufacturer must appoint a new legal representative in Costa Rica, of course, issue a new power of attorney, and submit the corresponding transfer of ownership change documentation to the Ministry of Health.
So it can be done online,
Yeah,
okay,
totally online.
totally online. Okay, well, it's quite convenient.
Yeah.
And once the device is approved and used in hospitals, the clock starts ticking on dental vigilance under Decree 39342S. And if a device malfunctions, how aggressive are the Ministry of Health's reporting timelines for adverse events?
Yeah. Well, Costa Rica does have reporting requirements for adverse events, and serious incidents are expected to be reported quickly once they are identified. However, I think the bigger story is that the Ministry of Health is placing increasing emphasis on post-market surveillance now, because historically vigilance activities have not received the same level of attention as product registration. But recent organization changes have strengthened the surveillance and control functions within the ministry. So I believe this will lead to more active oversight in the coming years. So manufacturers should not think of compliance as ending when they obtain the certificate of registration. They need effective compliance handling, vigilance, and post-market monitoring processes throughout the product life cycle.
But so far there hasn't been a guideline on the timelines for reporting adverse events, no strict requirements.
No, there is not very clear defined.
Okay, so it's still under development.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Karol. These are incredibly practical insights. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us today. And thanks again for joining us, everyone. We'll see you again on the platform. And if you haven't checked out our website, please head to ElendiLabs.com and be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn.